Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be tackling something that I think a lot of people kind of whisper about in the Reiki community. And it's this question of, appropriate boundaries between Reiki teachers and students. Um, and specifically when it comes to romantic or sexual relationships. So we're going to be looking at a blog post by Bronwen Logan. Now, Bronwen is a leading Reiki expert and teacher, and she really kind of lays it all out there. The title of the post is, Should Reiki Teachers Sleep with Their Students?
Pretty provocative right off the bat.
Yeah, definitely a bold title. And, I think what's really interesting is what led Bronwen to write this piece. She talks about this moment in a class discussion where somebody brought up, a male Reiki teacher who was, involved with several students. And instead of being, shocked or outraged, she found herself chuckling. But it wasn't really a chuckle of amusement. It was more like a, here we go again kind of chuckle. And Bronwen argues that, that kind of complacency is really dangerous and that we need to kind of unpack these power dynamics. So what for you really stood out about her analysis of those power dynamics?
Well, I think, she does a really great job of breaking down that inherent power imbalance that exists in a teacher-student relationship. And it's not just about knowledge, right? The teacher obviously has expertise that the student is seeking, but it goes beyond that. Reiki students often view their teachers as wise, enlightened figures, almost like spiritual guides in a way. So you can see how that would create a dynamic where the student is, naturally inclined to trust and defer to the teacher's authority.
Right, that can make them more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Especially when you layer on the fact that Reiki involves this element of energetic exchange.
Exactly.
Can you kind of elaborate on that a bit for our listener?
Sure. So in Reiki, we talk about this flow of energy between practitioner and client. Now, imagine that dynamic within a teacher-student relationship where there's already, a power differential. So there's a potential for that energetic exchange to be, manipulated or even exploited, particularly if the student is already feeling vulnerable or emotionally dependent on the teacher. And, that's where things can get really complicated because you have this mix of, emotional vulnerability and spiritual seeking and these energetic dynamics all kind of converging in a space where, boundaries can easily get blurred.
Right. And so given all of that, given those inherent power dynamics, what kind of harm can actually occur when a Reiki teacher does cross that line and engages in a romantic or sexual relationship with a student?
Well, Bronwen lays out several potential consequences, and, they're not good. For the student, it can be incredibly damaging to their sense of self. Imagine being in a situation where you're told that, these relationships are wrong, but you're also experiencing feelings of love or connection with your teacher. So you can see how that would create this internal conflict that can lead to intense feelings of shame, guilt, confusion. Not to mention the potential for manipulation and exploitation, especially if the teacher is using their position of power to coerce the student.
Right. And, beyond the impact on the individual student, I imagine this would also create a sense of distrust within the entire Reiki community.
Absolutely. Other students might perceive favoritism, wondering if they're being treated differently because they're not romantically involved with the teacher. And that can really erode the sense of safety and trust that's so crucial for learning and healing to take place. It also undermines the teacher's credibility. Even if they're a skilled practitioner, their actions will always be viewed through a lens of suspicion.
It's like that saying, one bad apple spoils the bunch. If one teacher behaves unethically, it kind of casts a shadow over the entire practice of Reiki.
Exactly. And that's something that Bronwen is deeply concerned about. She wants to see Reiki recognized as a legitimate healing modality. But incidents like these can really set the whole field back. People start to question its validity and efficacy, and it reinforces those negative stereotypes about Reiki being, flaky or unregulated.
Right, so it's not just about the individuals involved. It's about the reputation and the integrity of Reiki as a whole. So given all of this, what can be done to address this issue? Does Bronwen offer any solutions in her post?
She does. And I have to say, I was really impressed with her proactive approach. She doesn't just point out the problems, she actually offers a roadmap for change.
Okay, I'm all ears. What does she suggest?
One of her key recommendations is for Reiki organizations to establish clear ethical guidelines, similar to what you see in other professional fields like therapy or counseling. These guidelines would explicitly state that romantic or sexual relationships between teachers and students are unacceptable. It sounds like a no-brainer, but surprisingly, many Reiki organizations don't have these kinds of formal codes of conduct in place.
Yeah, that's concerning. It seems like a pretty basic step to ensure ethical conduct.
It is, but it goes beyond just having those guidelines written down somewhere. Bronwen emphasizes the importance of actually teaching these principles to both teachers and students, integrating them into training programs, having open discussions about power dynamics and boundaries, making it an ongoing part of the learning process.
So it's about creating a culture of awareness and accountability from the very beginning.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. She also suggests ongoing professional development for teachers focusing on ethical considerations and best practices. This could involve mentorship programs or peer supervision groups where teachers can discuss challenging situations, get feedback, and receive support from colleagues.
I love that idea. It's like creating a safety net, both for the teachers and the students.
It is. And another crucial element is establishing clear reporting mechanisms for students who feel they've been harmed or have witnessed unethical behavior. This could involve creating a confidential hotline or designating a trusted individual within the Reiki organization who can handle these sensitive situations.
Right. So giving students a voice and making sure they feel safe to come forward without fear of judgment or reprisal.
Precisely. And finally, Bronwen stresses the importance of transparency. She advocates for open discussions within the Reiki community about ethical challenges. This includes sharing information about disciplinary actions taken against teachers who have violated ethical codes. It can feel uncomfortable to air these kinds of issues publicly, but it's crucial for building trust and accountability.
Absolutely.
Mm.
It shows that the community is taking these issues seriously and is committed to creating a safer environment for everyone.
I couldn't agree more. It's a powerful message to send.
Now, I'm curious, how does Bronwyn envision these changes actually being implemented? Does she talk about specific strategies for getting buy-in from Reiki organizations and teachers?
She does. And this is where it gets really interesting because it involves a shift in mindset. She argues that we need to move away from this idea of Reiki as a purely intuitive practice and embrace a more professional approach that includes a strong ethical framework. This means recognizing that even though Reiki deals with energy and spirituality, it still operates within a human context where power dynamics exist and ethical boundaries need to be clearly defined and upheld.
So it's not about rejecting the intuitive aspect of Reiki, but integrating it with a more grounded professional approach.
Exactly. And that involves open dialogue, collaboration, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. I think the key takeaway here is that the ethical challenges we've discussed are not unique to Reiki. They exist in any relationship where there's a power imbalance, whether it's between a therapist and client, a coach and athlete, or even a boss and employee.
So it's about recognizing those power dynamics and advocating for ethical conduct in all areas of our lives.
Absolutely. We all have a responsibility to hold ourselves and others accountable to create a world where power is used responsibly and ethically.
Okay, so we've talked about the power dynamics and we've talked about the, potential for harm in these relationships. But I really want to dig into the solutions that Bronwen Logan proposes. And you mentioned this idea of moving towards a more professional approach to Reiki. How do we do that while still honoring the intuitive and spiritual aspects of the practice?
Right. It's that balance, isn't it? Well, Bronwen argues that professionalism and spirituality don't have to be at odds with each other. In fact, she says that having a strong ethical framework actually enhances the practice of Reiki because it creates this safer and more trustworthy environment for everybody. When you think about it, clear guidelines and open communication can really help prevent misunderstandings and, those boundary violations and the harm that we've been talking about.
Yeah, it's like you're building a solid foundation so that that energy can flow more freely and safely.
Exactly. And part of building that foundation is empowering both teachers and students to recognize and address those ethical dilemmas. That's why Bronwen really emphasizes ongoing education when it comes to things like power dynamics, boundaries, professional ethics. Imagine if Reiki training programs included, workshops or discussions on these issues. It would create a culture of awareness and responsibility right from the start.
Right, it's like planting those seeds of ethical awareness really early on.
Exactly. And those seeds can keep growing through ongoing professional development for teachers. Things like mentorship programs or peer supervision groups, even online forums where teachers can, talk about challenging situations and get support from colleagues. These are all really valuable tools for, promoting that ethical conduct.
It's like creating that network of support where teachers feel comfortable asking for guidance and, holding each other accountable.
Right. And we can't forget about the importance of giving students a voice in this whole process, too. Having those clear reporting mechanisms for students who feel that they've been harmed or, maybe they witness some unethical behavior, those are essential, whether it's a confidential hotline or like an ombudsman within the organization or even just, a designated person that students can talk to. Creating those safe spaces for reporting is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, it's about empowering those students to speak up.
Yeah.
And then making sure that their concerns are actually heard and taken serious.
It can be tempting to try to sweep these things under the rug,
Right.
but doing that just perpetuates a culture of silence, and it allows those harmful behaviors to continue.
Yeah, you got to bring it out into the open. It's about holding each other accountable and creating that system that really prioritizes the well-being of both the students and the teachers.
I couldn't agree more. And ultimately, I think Bronwen's vision for a more ethical Reiki community really comes down to this, recognizing that we're all human, we all make mistakes, and we all have a responsibility to create, that safer and more trustworthy environment for everybody involved.
So for our listener who's maybe just starting out on their Reiki journey, or even someone who's been practicing for years, what's that one key takeaway that you want to leave them with?
I think it's this. Ask questions. Be discerning. Don't be afraid to question authority. Seek out those teachers who are really modeling that ethical behavior and advocate for your own well-being within that community.
Yeah, that's such a powerful message. And it goes beyond Reiki too, right?
Yeah.
We can apply that same kind of discerning approach to any relationship where there's a power dynamic,
Yeah.
whether it's with a therapist or a doctor or a spiritual advisor or even, a boss.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We all have the right to feel safe and respected and empowered in those relationships. And I think we all have a role to play in creating a world where ethical conduct is the norm and not the exception.
Well said. I think on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the complexities of Reiki teacher-student relationships. We hope this has been, informative and thought-provoking for you. Thanks so much for joining us.